Hi, I'm Pete, and welcome to Just a Few Acres Farm. Well, today's a big day. We're going to put the engine back on the rear end of the MD. I took the engine off the engine stand so that I could put on the rear plate, flywheel, clutch, etc. So first I'm going to put on the rear plate. Now we've got two alignment dowels here, so I'll have to tap it in over those. My dad's going to help me with this job, and in order to get the engine ready we have to install the flywheel and the clutch assembly, and then we'll mate it up with the rear end of the tractor. I want to show you something interesting about the flywheel that I learned while I was cleaning it up. This is the pilot bearing that the clutch shaft mounts into, and there's a grease zerk here on the outside that you access via the inspection port on, I think it's on the bottom side of the tractor. Anyway, when I grease this, grease starts shooting out of the hole here to lubricate this pilot bearing. And actually it doesn't lubricate directly into the bearing. It shoots out through this hole and fills this space that is behind the pilot bearing on the end of the crankshaft to lubricate the pilot bearing. I just thought that was interesting. I love these little things about engines. My camera crapped out on me, and so all the flywheel and the clutch assembly installation isn't there, but here's what we did. We used a piece of shaft, which is real handy, to align the pressure plate and the clutch, or the pilot bearing, before you put it on the tractor, because if they're not in alignment, then you're going to have a heck of a time getting the shaft from the tractor all the way through into the pilot bearing. And we put the clutch on, and it's really pretty straightforward anyway. Now we're going to bring the tractor in and mate the engine up with the tractor. Firewood, it's got a million uses, I'll tell you. Let's get up a little bit. Whoa. Here comes the fun part. There we go. These alignment dowels got to be the first thing that lines everything up. And we're off. There's one. There's two. If they're aligned, everything's aligned. Then the two bolts to the top of the bell housing that go through and anchor into the engine here. And then the other things that anchor the engine are where the frame rail bolts come through here. There's 4 of them on each side. I packed this one with some extra lock washers to make up for the thickness of the frame rails that would normally be there. And we're just going to put some of them on and tighten them down temporarily. Just make sure everything mated up all right. Give it a turn in neutral. Yep, it's good. Yeah. No, not much. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Having the engine up here to work on sure does make it nice. The next thing I'm going to do is put the rest of the valve tappets in. And if you remember, I installed 4 of them before I put the camshaft in because they had to come in from the bottom. These guys come in from the top. So I've got them ordered according to which bore they go into. That's important with tappets or lifters. We'll give them a liberal dose of assembly lube. Slide them in. Next I'm going to put on the tappet retainers and the tappet covers on the side of the engine. But I wanted to show you, this is where taking your time disassembling makes things easier on reassembly. I label all the bolts when they come out and put them in baggies These are the bolts for the tappet covers, and then I put them all in a box. So when I'm putting things back together, I know exactly which bolt goes where, or which piece of hardware. And of course they all need to be cleaned up and new washers put on them before I reassemble. First thing that goes on is these tappet retainers, which keep the tappets from coming out of their bores should the tractor ever flip over onto its back. It's pretty chilly out there today, so I turned on the heat. Next I have to assemble the valve tappet covers that go on the side of the engine, and the front one has a breather on it. It's a crankcase breather, so this is actually the first piece I'm putting on that I've already painted, but this goes on here like this, and then eventually the breather tube will go down the side of the engine, but I'm going to leave that off for now till after I paint the engine. So this thing's just got a piece of steel wool in it to filter any bugs from getting back up into the engine. It allows the crankcase to breathe. So I got to put a gasket on it, put the inner plate in, and go ahead with that. Set the gasket for it. It's got Permatex on one side, gasket sealer. Here's something that's new to me. Originally, the bolts that hold these covers on had copper gaskets on them, crush washers that went on here. Well, with my gasket kit, what came for these instead is, I guess it's a kind of real hard plastic, and I tested it with a pair of pliers, and yes indeed it does crush like a copper washer would, so I'm putting these on instead of the copper. I'll just coat this, and then the cover goes on like this. Then the other one. Now that I got all the valve tappets in, I'm going to do a simple timing check by putting in the push rods on number 1 piston. Just got to get them located right here. I can tell by looking at these two connecting rods right where the engine is now what the valve positions would be. This one is lower and this one is higher. So this one being lower and the rocker arm goes like this valve would be closed. This one being higher, the rocker arm would be like this and this valve would be open. So let's go through the 4 strokes of the engine here just to check out the timing. I've got 2 push rods, this one's higher. I'm coming up with the first piston here, and this one is holding the valve open since it's higher. That is the exhaust valve, so this is the exhaust stroke. It's pushing the combusted air out through the exhaust. I get to the top. Now the exhaust valve is closed, they're both even. Now this one's raising up. Now that's the intake valve. So now we're on the first stroke of the 4-stroke, which would be the intake stroke. It's sucking in fresh air through the intake valve. And I'm coming to the bottom of that stroke. That valve closes. This just dropped down. And now I'm on the compression stroke. Both valves are closed at this point. These are even, and they stay that way all the way up the compression stroke. Now I'm coming to the top dead center of the compression stroke. Bang, the cylinder fires. Valves stay closed while the explosion's happening. It's coming down to the bottom of that stroke. And now this valve, my exhaust valve, is starting to push open Piston's coming back up. It's exhausting the air that was just burned, the air in the fuel that was just burned. So those are the 4 strokes, and I know that my timing is right. The valves seem to be acting the way they should. It's just a simple check. Next, I'm going to put in the oil pump, and first I'll lubricate the gear that drives off the camshaft with some assembly lube. Slides right up in here. Oh, come on, you. Whoops. Guess that needs a cotter pin. There we go. Trying to remember which way it goes. Luckily, these things usually only go together one way, and it's that way. Now this is strange. The bolts that hold it on, there's 2 of them, get both a lock washer. I checked the parts manual, and they get mechanics wire to keep them from falling out. The next thing to do is secure the oil pump mounting bolts with mechanics wire. This is 18 gauge wire, and it's the only place in this engine that has wire constrained bolts instead of cotter pins or foldovers. So I'm going to put that on. I certainly am no expert on installing lock wire. I just try to get it so that it's pulling to the right on each bolt. I don't know if you can see that over there. And then it kind of figure eights around and I twist it tight. It doesn't have to be super tight. If this bolts start to loosen up, then they're going to pull against the wire and they'll only loosen a little bit. Then put on the suction screen for the oil pump, and that calls for an 1/8 inch by 1 1/4 inch cotter pin, and that holds it in the slot. Here's how I think I'm going to proceed now. If I put this distributor drive on here with its timing gear, then I'll have everything under the front cover on. I can go ahead and put on the front cover, and then I can put the oil pan on because there's oil pan bolts that mount up into the front cover, and I can start closing in the engine that way. Next, I need to assemble the distributor drive and put the timing gear on here and put a new seal in here. I don't know if you remember, but the shaft, originally it's got some wear on it, and I test fit the new seal on here, and it's still got good contact when the seal seats down in, so I think this is going to be fine even though it shows a little bit of wear and shininess in it. Well, first thing we got to pop out the old seal here. Well, that old seal doesn't want to come out, so I'll cut it with a chisel and then pop it out. And sometimes these old seals are real buggers to get out. Come on, you. Practically have to break them up to get them out. She wants to play it by coming out in pieces. Well, I can play that game. Ooh, I tapped on it through this oil hole here and into the back side of it and finally got that sucker out, mutilated. I'll put the new seal in. Remember, the open side goes toward the oil, so the oil's coming from the timing cover here, goes in this way. I always coat seals with a little gasket seal because I don't have much luck with the paint on the outside of them sealing. Get her square in the bore here. A few taps with this socket to start it. These ears are what the distributor drive engages with on the distributor or the magneto. We'll just lube her up and put her in the bore. And lubricate the seal lip. There we go. I don't want to get this new paint all dirty. It's got to stay clean. All right, now on this end, we've got to install the timing gear and this little hour meter drive spiral gear, and a nut. I don't know if you remember, but we had a worn Woodruff key on this shaft right here, which loosened the gear on the shaft. I bought a new Woodruff key, so we're going to put that in and make sure everything's tight when we put the gear on. I know the gear goes on this way because it's got a flat spot with a shiny spot on it, and that's where the washer that locks everything together goes. So I know this side goes out. Shoot, it's still got some slop in it. Ah, that's frustrating. Nuts. Yeah. That key's still got some rock in it. Well, this is discouraging. I can show you what's going on. See, I still got play here. If I take it apart, this is probably going to be really hard for you to see, but inside that keyway, it's worn where the old key slapped against it when it was loose. So when I put the new key in, it's still got some rock in it. I don't know if you can see that, but that's what happens. The slot's a little wider than it should be. And also on the shaft, if I put the Woodruff key in here, I've got the same deal. The slot it feels tight when you put it in there, but the slot is a little bit worn on the side. It may be that I can just get away with, well, both are going to have to be widened. If you widen one, you got to widen the other on the shaft and on the gear. So that's a setback. I'm going to have to talk to my dad's machinist friend and see if he can mill out a wider keyway and put a wider Woodruff key in it. Bummer. Well, I guess it's on to plan B. I'm going to have to wait on that distributor drive for a while till we figure that out. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the head studs, and I spent, I don't know, half an hour probably on the grinder with a wire brush. First I cleaned them in the parts washer, and then I ground all the carbon off them with a wire brush. It's a good thing that I like cleaning bolts because that's a big part of tractor restoration. And you see what I got to deal with here on the head studs is some of the bolts are blind. They've got a bottom in the hole. And some of them go straight through into the water jacket like that one there, if you can see it. So for the ones that are blind, I'm gonna chase the threads on all of them before I put in the head studs. But on the ones that are blind, I'm just gonna put in with a little light oil. And the ones that are open, I'm going to use Permatex Right Stuff as a thread sealer. I've had good luck with it as a thread sealer, even though it's not listed as such. So starting from the corner here, I'm just going to go through and chase every head stud thread. I think half the reason for chasing the threads is the gunk that you dig out of the bottom of the hole. They have to clean off the threader. It's good to have clean holes here. Ugh. Alright, I got all the holes cleaned out, and studs are coarse on one end, fine on the other. Coarse end goes into the block. I'm going to install the ones that are in blind holes first, and I just put a little oil on the end that's going into the block. Actually, only 4 of them are in blind holes. The rest are open, so I'm going to go ahead and tighten these down. And when I tighten them down, I don't torque them. I just snug them and give them a little pull, and that's good enough. Now for the rest of these, I think there's 17 total, so that would leave 13. I take a little bit of high tack and dab it on, smear it around the threads, especially toward the bottom of the stud, and then thread it in. If you don't remember, or maybe you weren't following when I was pulling this apart, these stud extractors and installers are awesome. They're Ossenmacher is the brand name, and really well made. Nobody paid me for this endorsement, by the way. And they just work great. I love them. Old Farmalls are not an engine that you need to install new head studs in when you rebuild an engine, unless there's a problem with one of the studs, like it's stretched or the threads are screwed up or it's rusted out. They're fine to reuse. when you get on to the later, bigger engines that International made, sometimes those need to be replaced, but H's and M's, A's, B's, C's, not a worry. Even the 504 and the 656, the head studs were fine. And I just carefully wipe off any of the thread sealer that came up above the deck so it doesn't interfere with the head gasket or anything like that. Get it off of there. Now I'm afraid I've hit a dead end. I can't put the head on because I'm waiting for injector pre-cups, the cups that I had to pull out, weld plates on and pull out. Bates is trying to locate some replacements for me. I guess they're not easy to come by considering how hard they are to pull out undamaged. So I'm kind of stuck on the top end of the engine, and I'm stuck on the front end of the engine until I get that distributor drive keyway repaired or figure out something to do with that. So I can't close the bottom end of the engine in until that, and I'm in a holding pattern. Isn't this an old theme with the MD? You go a little ways and then you hit a roadblock, have to work your way around it, go a little ways more. I guess it's par for the course. I'll just keep plugging along. Meanwhile, the weather's improved, so I got a lot to do outside. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time.